Morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here for this very important hearing. I taught in and I now represent a congressional district that's been defined by tragedy. Newtown Sandy Hook is in my district. And in my own school district, the Waterbury Public School System, we did extensive work on trauma, training all of our social workers on adverse childhood experiences and hosting a series of symposiums for trauma in early childhood. All of our teachers and faculty members went through professional development on social and emotional learning. One of the presenters, I remember this very clearly, told us as a group that our children were scoring just as high as veterans on the trauma scale. And I know personally that once educators begin to see children through a trauma-informed lens, they can shift from blaming them for the behavior to beginning to understand the root causes of those behaviors. But what I want to talk about today is the fact that trauma extends beyond the point of impact. Grief counseling happens, the day after something happens at a school, but the grief resulting from those tragedies extends into our communities, and I see that every day in Connecticut 5. Just this spring, one of the parents of the students at Sandy Hook tragically took his own life. So I ask you, if the parents are still struggling, or if adults are still struggling, imagine what children are going through. We recently did a study in Connecticut, and the results were astonishing. 90% of kindergartners reported experiencing ACE events, but only 23% were currently displaying symptoms. What this tells us is that 67% of students are experiencing ACEs, but are unidentified and untreated, allowing them to worsen over time. So I cringe to think that these children are coming of age and they have all of these experiences that they do not know how to address. Actually, Mr. Chair, I'd like to introduce this testimony that I just cited into the record. Thank you. So my question today, I have two questions. First for Dr. Burke-Harris. What can we do post-trauma for families to make sure that they have the supports that they need 2 years, 5 years down the road, to make sure, especially in communities that have polarizing, targeted issues that we can identify? Because I think the one thing that we can all agree on is that it's not the children's fault, the families that they come from. And then my next question, if you could follow up, is for Dr. Jackson. What do you think the impact of secondary trauma is on the educators who have to, year after year, stand in front of children? Oftentimes we think of events like the one I just described, but we have children with prolonged trauma as a result of their daily interactions, and teachers who see this year after year. And it's kind of hard to feed hope into someone when you're just repeating the cycle every single year. So, Dr. Burke-Harris.
Thank you. Those are excellent questions. I think there are a couple of critical pieces. Number one, a recognition that trauma in our communities, right, is so common that a true public health approach involves universal precaution, if you will. This is why trauma-informed care in our educational systems is so critical, because we have to be providing these supports and services routinely as part of our way of doing business in education in order to respond to the endemic levels of trauma that we're seeing. Another piece is the role of screening and partnership, cross-sector partnerships. The prevalence of trauma is so high that, I hear educators saying, okay, what can we do? I hear doctors saying, what can we do? I hear law enforcement saying, what can we do? How can we be part of the solution? And when each of us takes our little piece, right, there's a tremendous amount that we can do to support resilience and buffering across our communities, and increasing that cumulative dose of buffering, making sure that every adult in the environment understands not only how they're managing their own history of adversity, because as you mentioned, it's not just vicarious trauma for educators, but the fact that educators are...
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I cannot let my time expire
without yes, please.
Speaking to what happens to teachers.
Absolutely.
All right, I'll be quick, but I feel just as passionate. Teachers, we see higher turnover rates and burnout. We also see depression. We've had teachers report depression as a result of some of the things that they've been able to hear, and not only because the stories are so challenging, but because in some cases it's feeling of hopelessness. When we don't have the resources, when we don't have a place to point students and families to, when they have the courage to share with us what's going on, teachers feel hopeless in that regard, and that can contribute to some of the depression and things that have been reported.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, with that, I yield back.